Next, from Springfield, Attorney General Lisa Madigan held an emergency summit on the growing threat to young people posed by synthetic drugs. The Attorney General told law enforcement officers, medical personnel, and educators that these drugs are causing strokes, heart attacks, and even death. We'll also hear from one mother whose son died after using synthetic drugs. This runs about 15 minutes. Can you start and give us a statement on what you were doing here today?
Sure. Today we had an emergency summit on synthetic drugs. We gathered approximately 200 members of law enforcement, educators, medical personnel, parents from around the state to talk about fake marijuana and convenience store cocaine. These are two substances that have become readily available convenience stores, gas stations, tobacco shops, and because people can purchase them, unfortunately, they are under the impression that these are safe alternatives to illegal drugs. What we have seen time and again and in growing numbers is that there are more and more kids, because about 80% of the people who purchase and use these substances are below the age of 30. We've seen not just horrible medical incidents, but we've seen tragic fatalities as well.
These new chemicals pop up all the time. You ban one, another one pops up. So is anything happening on the federal level to just get rid of these specific chemicals?
Yeah, so the DEA already has put in place an emergency ban on a number of the chemicals that are used to make these synthetic drugs. We've done the same thing here in Illinois legislatively. In addition, there's a law that will go into effect on January 1st that not just bans the chemicals that were really the first wave of chemicals we saw used to manufacture the synthetic drugs, but also their analogs. In other words, similar compounds with potentially similar effects, but unfortunately they're deadly effects that will also be banned.
What kind of role does law enforcement have to play in the fact that these new type of drugs are coming out? I mean, first you're hearing about, marijuana and other drugs like that, but now it's like a new age. So what can law enforcement do to kind of help combat this stuff?
Well, whenever you're dealing with drugs, you've got two issues. You've got a supply side issue that law enforcement deals with, and you've got a demand issue, which is where the education piece comes in. One of the reasons to bring people together today is that these synthetic drugs are very new, almost unheard of in 2009. 2010, Poison Control Centers nationally saw about 2,000 reports of synthetic drug reactions, people showing up in ERs. This past year so far, in 2011, nearly 6,000 reports, both 6,000 reports on the fake marijuana as well as almost 6,000 reports on the convenience store cocaine. So these are people who are having extreme reactions. They're hallucinating, they're very violent, they're delusional, and unfortunately we've seen a growing number of fatalities. And so what we need to do is educate parents in particular and kids about the dangers of these drugs, but we're also working on the law enforcement side to limit the supply, to go into the stores, tell them not to sell it, take the product that they've got and test it, charge people if need be.
Local law enforcement agencies are concerned they've had to cut their drug departments, but between now and January, when that law goes into effect, what do you suggest they do?
Well, there's two things to do. There's the education piece of it to reduce demand, but it's also going to demand law enforcement response. Law enforcement, and we had many members of law enforcement in this room, probably the predominant group in here was law enforcement. We're working with them to give them the tools that they need to identify these drugs, to make sure they get them out of the stores, to prosecute the people who are selling them.
Relatively new problem having to test these drugs to determine if they fall under the category of illegal substances. Do you know about how much we're spending, I guess since 2009 doing that? Obviously the cost is an issue.
I do not off the top of my head. You'd have to talk to individual law enforcement agencies to find out.
When we're referring it to state police, it's something that we don't necessarily...
You could refer it to state police and ask. I don't know.
They don't either because they're not handling it directly.
Okay, so they're saying it to state police. Well, then call state police and ask. They're not under my realm.
Sorry, when you said there were was a number of deaths, I think it was 6,000 incidents you had mentioned. Was that statewide or is that national?
That's a national number. So the national number on the synthetic drugs, the reports to poison control centers. And so this is going to be when there is an extreme reaction. Somebody either shows up in an emergency room or maybe they're at home and somebody calls a poison control center. Those numbers total for the fake marijuana as well as the convenience store cocaine nationwide, 2011 to date, is almost 12,000. Last year, the total number was only approximately 5,000. So that just shows the explosion in terms of the number of people that are taking these drugs and having extreme reactions. And that, again, is only going to be a small number compared to the people who have extreme reactions, but oftentimes because they're kids, they're scared to call anybody. They're scared to, tell their parents. They're scared to go to the emergency room. So there are certainly instances that are not being captured in those numbers, but that's just to give you a sense of how many people are starting to take them and how many people are having adverse reactions. Again, if people are under the illusion that because they can go into a store and purchase these substances to take, that it's going to be safe, they are completely wrong. In fact, we're seeing just far too many people with extreme physical, mental reactions and too many kids killing themselves.
Do you have the tools you need legally so to combat this? Is part of the answer a legislative answer, and if so, are you introducing a bill to give you the powers to address it? And to what extent do you financially, or does law enforcement have the wherewithal to address this?
So certainly with every single drug, there are two sides to the response. There is the supply side, which law enforcement does to make sure that these dangerous and illegal chemicals are not made available to people to take. The other side of it is dealing, with the demand side, making sure that people know how dangerous these chemicals are, making sure they understand that the response that they could have could be fatal to them. So we're working on both of those fronts. The idea of the Emergency Summit today was to get those resources out to a broader group of law enforcement in the state, as well as the medical professionals, the educators who are working day to day when people come in who are, hallucinating, they're violent, they're delusional, they feel like they, are being chased by demons and want to kill themselves. And so that's what we're doing.
One of the things you mentioned to the crowd was that, if your agency needs to come in and educate, do community outreaches and educate parents, what are you willing or what are you prepared to do to make sure parents are aware of what's happening if their child is...
That's one of the reasons that we've already been putting together materials. We gave everybody who came here today a packet of materials. Unfortunately, there are a growing number of kids who've taken these drugs and had terrible reactions who are out on the speaking circuit, as well as Karen Dobner, who's here today, who's a parent who lost her 19-year-old son who smoked fake marijuana just once. And so I know that she is available to talk to the media as well as to go out and talk to parents and talk to kids about the impact of this. I mean, a lot of this is education, and so truthfully I'm thankful that you're all here today to cover this.
With the meth, you guys came out with a big ad campaign, television commercials, and are you guys willing?
Well, the Meth Project did that, and so that was, a partially private funded, as well as some public funds made available to do that. One of the great things that the Meth Project recently did, actually it was earlier this week, was to put up a website. And I know that the people in Winnebago County, the people in our office, were talking about doing something similar because one, that's where the kids go. Two, that makes it available to everybody. And so, one of our goals is going to be, particularly when it comes to being able to identify what these drugs look like, because we've gone out into the field and purchased these, we want to make sure that people can see them. So and I know we can get you all a CD to put the pictures up, or you can go over and take some B-roll on the table of them, so you can get that information out as well. But we're using it for the same reasons, same purposes.
On June 14th, I got the worst phone call of my life, the phone call that no parent in the world wants to hear, and that is, your son had an accident and he did not survive. And all I could say was, no, 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 no. And it was true. After I went to the hospital, I found out, my oldest son told me that Max had called him and said, Justin, I smoked that legal stuff and my heart's pounding and I'm having a panic attack. And Justin said, lay down, take a shower, relax, and you'll be okay. Well, half an hour later, he got into his car, and there were reports that he was driving down the road at speeds reaching 100 miles an hour, and he drove into a house and died instantly. So, since that day, it's been my mission to educate people, because I had never heard of fake pot, synthetic marijuana. And when I found out that it was sold in almost every gas station, convenience store, and tobacco shop in our town and all the surrounding towns, I was shocked, especially finding out how horrible the side effects are and that we have no idea how many kids have died and how many homicides and suicides and all kinds of side effects, and we don't know because the testing is so difficult with this product because hundreds, up to 500 chemicals are used in various locations all across the country to produce this product.
What kind of a boy was Max?
Max was the perfect son. He wanted nothing more than to make his mommy happy. He used to call himself a mama's boy. He used to call me mommy because he knew I loved it. He wanted to take care of his mom. He wanted to take care of everybody. He was a do-gooder. He never was in any trouble. He did get in trouble right before his death. He brought home some pets without asking. And that was about the only trouble Max ever got into. He did all his assignments on time. Max never got into any trouble. Max was the perfect son.
And aside from what we've already talked about, you know, your son Max was such a good boy. You never had any indication he would do that. Is there, I mean, what would you say to parents? I mean, geez, you have a perfect kid, you don't think they're going to do anything stupid, but on the other hand, kids are kids. What would you want not only the public to know, but what would you want law enforcement to do? Or what do you, knowing what you've learned about this issue, what would you say should be happening in our society to stop it?
Well, first of all, I think parents need to understand that they need to stop thinking that they don't have to worry about their kids. Because I've said that 100 times. I don't have to worry about Max. I was wrong. Because there is a danger out there that appears to be safe. If it's legal, it's safe, the kids think. Well, even adults think if it's legal, it's safe. So parents and educators need to understand this is the perception that kids have. If it's legal, it's safe. The only reason it's legal is because the bad guys are moving faster than us. That's why it's legal. I think that law enforcement needs to understand that they need to start passing laws that just because you stamp not for human consumption on a package doesn't mean that you can sell anything you want. Okay, we know this stuff is very, very dangerous. We know about the deaths. We know about the suicides. And just because they stamp not for human consumption on a package, even though they're marketing it for human consumption, but just because they put that little stamp, they're getting away with literally murder. And I would say that law enforcement needs to start going after these guys. I'm going after the guy who produced this product. I'm going after him. This is my warning to him. I'm going after you. I'm not stopping until I get him.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.